On the morning of June 6, 1944, as the first pale streaks of dawn sliced through the mist-laden skies over the English Channel, the world held its breath. This was not just another day in a global conflict. It was a day when the courage, ingenuity, and resolve of the United States would collide headlong with the most formidable military machine the world had ever seen. Thousands of ships, bristling with men, tanks, artillery, and supplies, cut through the icy, turbulent waters, each vessel a moving testament to determination and resolve. On board, American soldiers, sailors, and airmen, young men from quiet small towns and bustling cities alike, gripped their weapons, adjusted their helmets, and prepared to step into history. For many, it was the culmination of months of training, yet no rehearsal could capture the reality awaiting them. Beaches fortified with steel, barbed wire, and mines, cliffs bristling with enemy snipers, and a storm of bullets and artillery ready to test their courage. On that fateful day, each man carried not just a rifle or a pack of supplies, but the very ideals of freedom, democracy, and human dignity, marching forward into a crucible that would define the character of a nation. The world was about to witness a spectacle of unparalleled heroism as American forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, determined to liberate Europe from tyranny and etch their names into history. The preparation for Operation Overlord was exhaustive, meticulous, and monumental in scope. For months, Allied commanders coordinated strategy across multiple nations, considering every conceivable variable, from tides and weather to enemy fortifications and troop morale. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower bore the immense responsibility of orchestrating an assault that would determine the fate of Europe. Intelligence reports, reconnaissance missions, and intercepted communications painted a detailed, yet incomplete, picture of the enemy's strength. Across southern England, American forces rehearsed every conceivable scenario, wading through mock surf, scaling artificial obstacles, simulating gunfire, and preparing for the chaos that would inevitably await them on the beaches. Yet even with the most precise planning, war remained unpredictable, and the true test would come not in training fields but on the storm-lashed shores of Normandy. Utah Beach, with its relatively gentler terrain, would demand courage, adaptability, and quick thinking, while Omaha Beach promised a test of human endurance, a sheer wall of death designed to crush the unprepared. German troops, confident in their fortifications, would soon discover that American courage, ingenuity, and determination could overcome even the most formidable defenses. As the first waves of American soldiers approached Omaha Beach, the reality of combat erupted with devastating immediacy. Men waded into water up to their waists, dragging rifles, ammunition, and wounded comrades through freezing surf, while German machine guns cut sweeping arcs of death across the sand. Every step forward required precision, nerve, and an iron will. Hesitation could mean instant death. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., the indomitable son of a former president, landed with the first wave and, observing the chaos around him, uttered the legendary words, "We'll start the war from here." His calm leadership in the face of sheer terror inspired men to advance where fear could have frozen them. Around him, acts of heroism unfolded in rapid succession. A young infantryman carried a wounded comrade to safety, bullets whistling past. A medic ran into open fire to provide aid, disregarding his own life. A lone machine gunner held a crucial position, preventing German forces from organizing counterattacks. Each action was a testament to human courage, creating a chain reaction of bravery that would ripple through the entire operation. German defenders, accustomed to methodical assaults and disciplined resistance, were unprepared for the sheer ferocity and determination of the American onslaught, their fortifications crumbling under relentless pressure. The chaos on Omaha Beach was intensified by the natural geography. Steep cliffs and bluffs offered the Germans commanding views and lethal angles of fire, creating kill zones where the first waves of soldiers faced near impossible odds. Barbed wire, hedgehogs, and strategically placed mines forced men to maneuver under constant threat, all while carrying cumbersome equipment. Yet, despite these obstacles, American forces pressed forward with unwavering resolve. The soldiers' determination was fueled not only by training, but by a profound sense of purpose, a belief that their actions could free millions from oppression and alter the course of history. Every foot gained in the sand represented a triumph of courage over fear, ingenuity over rigidity, and human will over mechanical might. German soldiers, seeing their defenses systematically breached, were struck by disbelief. They had expected a slower, more methodical advance. They had not anticipated the raw audacity, quick thinking, and relentless energy of the American assault. Panic began to set in among some units, eroding discipline, while the Americans exploited every gap and weakness in the enemy's line, turning what should have been a stalemate into a sweeping victory. Meanwhile, at Utah Beach, the landing was met with lighter resistance initially, but the danger remained severe. American forces faced sporadic fire from entrenched positions, yet their training allowed them to adapt and overcome. The 4th Infantry Division distinguished itself through coordinated advances, capturing strategic bridges, cutting enemy communications, and securing towns along the coastline. Paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped hours before the main assault, disrupted German lines from behind, sowing confusion and preventing reinforcements from reaching the beaches. The Germans, surprised by these airborne incursions, found themselves reacting to threats from multiple directions, unable to anticipate the innovative strategies employed by the Americans. Their shock and disorientation became a critical factor in the success of the operation, illustrating the psychological as well as tactical superiority of the U.S. forces. Every obstacle overcome, every defensive position neutralized, and every town secured contributed to a narrative of American courage that would be recounted for decades. The heroism displayed during these operations extended beyond the front lines. Naval and air forces provided indispensable support, navigating treacherous waters, enduring enemy fire, and coordinating strikes that suppressed German fortifications. Battleships and destroyers bombarded key positions, clearing paths for advancing troops, while landing craft braved the surf to deliver soldiers, tanks, and supplies. Pilots flew at low altitudes, strafing enemy positions and dropping bombs on strategic targets, all while risking their lives against anti-aircraft fire. The coordination among air, sea, and land forces was unprecedented, each element interdependent, yet each ultimately reliant on the bravery and resolve of the men storming the beaches. German defenders, witnessing this orchestrated onslaught, were faced with the terrifying reality that their expectations of a controlled defense were shattered. American forces did not simply attack, they overwhelmed, outmaneuvered, and outlasted, demonstrating a combination of courage, innovation, and teamwork that left the enemy in a state of shock. The human cost of the landings was staggering. On Omaha Beach alone, thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing by the end of the day. Medics worked tirelessly under fire, dragging the injured to safety, often while bullets whizzed past them. Every casualty was a reminder of the stakes at play. Yet despite these losses, the soldiers pressed forward, driven by duty, honor, and the belief that their actions would shape the future of the world. German troops, facing the relentless advance of the Americans, were forced to confront an enemy whose determination seemed inexhaustible, whose courage defied logic, and whose willingness to sacrifice was unshakable. Panic, confusion, and fear began to permeate their ranks, creating openings that American forces exploited with precision. By the afternoon, the beaches were firmly in Allied hands, the first major step in a campaign that would eventually liberate France and set the stage for the collapse of Nazi Germany. The actions of individual soldiers stood as beacons of heroism amid the chaos. In the surf, a soldier carried his fallen comrade, ignoring the hail of bullets around him. Medics sprinted across open sand to provide aid, their bravery undiminished by the constant threat of death. Machine gunners and riflemen held positions against overwhelming odds, repelling German attempts to reorganize or counterattack. Officers and NCOs led charges, inspiring hesitation into action, fear into determination. At every turn, ordinary men became extraordinary, their courage a living testament to the spirit of the nation. German defenders, faced with such relentless resolve, were unable to maintain the cohesion that had once made their fortifications formidable. Shock, disbelief, and fear eroded their will, illustrating a stark contrast between an enemy prepared in theory and Americans prepared in action and spirit. Behind the lines, command and support units performed feats that ensured the success of the operation. Engineers cleared obstacles, laying the groundwork for advancing troops. Logistics teams coordinated supplies under perilous conditions. Communication units maintained contact across beaches, ships, and aircraft. Every individual, regardless of combat role, contributed to a unified effort that demonstrated the full scope of American military capability. German forces, in contrast, faced fragmentation and confusion, unable to respond effectively to the coordinated, adaptive strategy employed by the Allies. This interplay between organized courage and shocked rigidity would define the battle, highlighting that success was as much about initiative and morale as it was about firepower and fortifications. As the day progressed, the inland advance intensified. Towns were captured, bridges secured, and enemy positions neutralized. The Germans, shocked by the audacity and effectiveness of the American assault, struggled to regroup or mount coordinated counterattacks. American soldiers, moving with discipline and ingenuity, leveraged every advantage, turning German defensive strengths into liabilities. The airborne operations continued to sow confusion, with paratroopers capturing key positions and preventing reinforcements from reaching critical points. German officers, confronted with a reality of American tenacity they had not anticipated, were forced into reactive, disorganized maneuvers, further compounding their losses and disorientation. The Americans, by contrast, demonstrated adaptability, leadership, and courage at every level, cementing their superiority both psychologically and tactically. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the beaches and inland towns, the full scale of American heroism and German shock became evident. The battle was far from over, yet the strategic objectives had been largely secured. The courage, ingenuity, and determination displayed by American forces that day reshaped the course of the war and set a benchmark for heroism that endures to this day. German troops, forced to confront the limits of their preparedness and the overwhelming resolve of their adversaries, had experienced a humbling and disorienting shock. The Americans had not merely stormed beaches, they had shattered expectations, overcome impossible odds, and demonstrated a level of courage and unity that would echo through history as a testament to human determination and national pride. The Army Rangers at Point du Hoc faced one of the most daunting missions imaginable. Tasked with scaling vertical cliffs under direct enemy fire to neutralize German artillery that threatened the landing forces on the beaches below, the Rangers confronted challenges that would test every ounce of human endurance, courage, and resolve. The cliffs rose sharply from the rocky coastline, jagged and unyielding, their faces slick with morning dew and the residue of previous bombardments. The wind whipped across the heights, carrying the scent of salt, gunpowder, and fear, and the cold of the early June morning seeped into every bone. As the Rangers approached, ropes dangled precariously from landing craft, ladders clattered against the rocks, and men gripped whatever handholds they could find, knowing that a single misstep could mean a fall to death or capture. The German troops stationed atop the cliffs, confident in the perceived impregnability of their positions, had spent months preparing for any frontal assault. They were disciplined, methodical, and heavily armed, with machine guns, mortars, and artillery carefully placed to mow down anyone attempting the climb. Yet nothing in their preparation could account for the relentless determination and ingenuity of the Rangers. Each step upward was a battle in itself. Men clambered over crumbling stone and jagged outcrops, shells exploding nearby and sending showers of rock and sand into the air. Bullets ricocheted from cliff faces with sharp, metallic echoes, cutting through the morning mist. A handhold that appeared solid would sometimes crumble, forcing the climber to improvise, to leap or swing to the next protrusion, trusting instinct and training over certainty. Comrades pulled each other up, sometimes sacrificing their own safety to save another. Some soldiers were struck by bullets and still pressed onward, driven by adrenaline, duty, and the knowledge that failure here could doom thousands of their fellow soldiers on the beaches below. Every inch gained was a mixture of triumph and terror. The German defenders fired relentlessly, attempting to disrupt the climb, but the Rangers adapted, rolling with the chaos, using terrain features for cover, and advancing in waves that forced the enemy to constantly redirect fire. This relentless forward momentum, the audacity of climbing what had been considered impregnable cliffs under lethal fire, was the embodiment of improvisation under extreme conditions. As the Rangers advanced, the psychological impact on the German troops became increasingly evident. Soldiers who had expected an orderly attack were confronted with men appearing almost miraculously from places they believed inaccessible. Machine gun crews had to abandon their firing angles to engage these unexpected threats. Mortars had to be adjusted mid-burst. Officers shouted frantic orders that were often drowned out by the roar of artillery and the cacophony of men climbing, shouting, and returning fire. The contrast between the disciplined, well-prepared German units and the adaptive, improvising Americans became stark. Every position taken by the Rangers was a small but critical victory that forced German soldiers to stretch their defenses thin, leaving other positions exposed. Panic began to ripple through their ranks. Some units hesitated, uncertain where the next threat would emerge. Others fired blindly into the cliffs, wasting ammunition and alerting the Rangers to their positions. Reports from surviving German soldiers after the battle described feelings of shock, disbelief, and growing fear. They had expected a conventional landing, but instead, they faced men who refused to be contained by geography, bullets, or strategy. Meanwhile, at Utah Beach, the scenario unfolded differently, yet no less dramatically. The initial landings met lighter resistance, a deceptive calm before the storm. German troops were prepared for the invasion, but the precision, timing, and coordination of American landings caught them partially off guard. The 4th Infantry Division landed with disciplined formations and immediately moved to execute complex maneuvers that had been rehearsed for months. They secured bridges and critical crossroads, cut enemy communication lines, and coordinated with airborne units dropped behind enemy lines to prevent reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Every action reflected extraordinary discipline, yet the soldiers also had to improvise when confronted with unforeseen obstacles. Destroyed bridges, unexpected minefields, and sporadic resistance from entrenched German units. Each platoon had to assess situations rapidly, making life-or-death decisions on the fly, and adjust their tactics to maintain the momentum of the landing. The American success here was not only a testament to planning, but also to the adaptability and courage of individual soldiers. The paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had landed hours earlier, under cover of darkness, and faced a landscape shrouded in uncertainty. Dropped often miles from their designated drop zones, they contended with tangled wires, deep ditches, marshes, hedgerows, and enemy patrols. The sounds of gunfire, exploding shells, and distant artillery created disorienting confusion. Small units quickly gathered, often without their commanding officers, and improvised plans to reach their objectives. Seizing bridges, cutting supply routes and neutralizing enemy positions. Some paratroopers encountered German patrols head-on, engaging in firefights that were intense and chaotic, yet their actions disrupted the enemy's cohesion and delayed reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Each successful mission was a testament to individual initiative, resilience, and leadership under extreme stress. The Germans, expecting a conventional, linear advance, found themselves confronted by unpredictable, highly mobile threats from multiple directions. Their carefully laid defensive plans began to unravel, orders were delayed, and the morale of many units started to crumble under the relentless pressure. Back at Point du Hoc, the Rangers' actions continued to set the tone for the rest of the invasion. Once atop the cliffs, they systematically neutralized artillery positions, capturing guns, disabling mechanisms, and holding their ground against counterattacks. The Germans, realizing their once secure positions had been compromised, attempted to regroup and counterattack, but they faced determined men who were now in the commanding position. Every shell fired from Point du Hoc was either ineffective or repelled, and the Rangers' control of the heights allowed artillery support to be redirected to assist the waves of soldiers on the beaches below. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. What had once seemed like a natural stronghold was now a battlefield in which they were at a severe disadvantage. Panic, hesitation, and disarray spread among units that were already under tremendous pressure. The audacity, skill, and tenacity of the Americans were not only tactical victories, but also strategic in eroding the confidence and cohesion of the enemy. On the beaches themselves, American soldiers confronted a mixture of natural and man-made obstacles. At Omaha Beach, men waded through surf, dragging weapons, ammunition, and supplies, while enemy machine guns swept the sand with deadly precision. Each wave of soldiers faced a lethal gauntlet, yet they moved forward, improvising cover, using terrain features, and helping comrades under fire. Leaders, from officers to non-commissioned officers, had to make instant decisions to keep men moving, redistribute forces, and exploit openings in German lines. The Germans, accustomed to predictable assaults, were confronted by relentless, adaptive attacks that disrupted their calculations and created confusion. Defensive positions that should have been secure were overrun. Machine guns were flanked, artillery was neutralized, and mortars were silenced. The Americans' ability to innovate in the heat of battle, combined with extraordinary bravery, caused German forces to falter, hesitate, and ultimately lose control of key sectors of the beach. As the day progressed, the integration of airborne, naval, and ground forces showcased an unprecedented level of coordination. Naval bombardments continued to suppress German positions, battleships delivered precise artillery fire, and destroyers maneuvered in dangerous waters to provide cover for landing troops. Sailors worked under extreme conditions, constantly adjusting to shifting tides, enemy fire, and the chaos of the landings, understanding that their actions directly affected the survival and success of the men on shore. Overhead, Allied aircraft maintained a relentless presence, conducting reconnaissance, bombings, and strafing runs that prevented German units from reorganizing. Fighter planes swooped low to target machine gun nests, while bombers eliminated bunkers and artillery emplacements. Reconnaissance aircraft relayed intelligence to command units, allowing adjustments in real time. The Germans, witnessing this massive, coordinated offensive, were forced to operate under duress, unable to effectively respond to simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts. The sheer scale of this combined arms operation created an overwhelming psychological impact, leaving German troops disoriented, fearful, and increasingly ineffective. Amidst the vast operations, individual stories of heroism and sacrifice stood out, humanizing the epic scale of the invasion. Soldiers carried wounded comrades under fire, medics braved bullets to provide aid, and officers led charges to inspire hesitant troops. At Utah Beach, a small squad of paratroopers, stranded far from their intended drop zone, overcame a German patrol and captured critical intelligence that enabled their division to secure a vital bridge. At Point du Hoc, a Ranger squad held a captured artillery position against repeated counterattacks, ensuring that the guns could not be used against soldiers landing below. Each act, whether small or large, contributed to the cumulative success of the invasion and exemplified extraordinary bravery. German forces, facing relentless, adaptive, and fearless adversaries, struggled to maintain cohesion. Units fragmented, orders went unexecuted, and morale plummeted. The Americans' ability to persevere, innovate, and maintain initiative highlighted a stark contrast between the attacking forces and the defenders, emphasizing the psychological as well as physical dimensions of victory. By the afternoon, the beaches were largely secured, though fighting continued inland. American soldiers consolidated gains, secured towns and strategic positions, and neutralized remaining pockets of resistance. Small unit leadership, improvisation, and courage under fire proved decisive in controlling the terrain and consolidating American positions. Paratroopers linked with advancing infantry, artillery support covered critical approaches, and engineers cleared obstacles to maintain momentum. German units, disoriented by relentless attacks from multiple directions, crumbled under pressure. Command structures faltered, and soldiers faced the terrifying reality that the Americans' audacity, coordination, and courage could not be countered. Psychological collapse accompanied physical defeat, further emphasizing the superiority and determination of the American forces. By the end of the day, the combination of heroism, planning, and tactical brilliance had yielded decisive results. The beaches were secured, inland objectives were being consolidated, and the German defenders had been forced to confront a force whose courage, adaptability, and relentless momentum left them demoralized and unprepared. The coordination between land, sea, and air during the D-Day invasion exemplified military synergy at its highest, most complex level, a feat of planning and bravery that had never before been attempted on such a scale. From the earliest hours before dawn, Allied naval forces had begun their approach across the English Channel, navigating waters fraught with peril. Mines, both visible and hidden, littered the approaches to the beaches, each one a deadly threat capable of ending a ship and its hundreds of occupants in an instant. The crews of the battleships, destroyers, and landing craft were acutely aware that their mission carried no margin for error. Every wave of water crashing against the hull, every fog bank concealing a potential enemy obstacle, and every enemy reconnaissance plane overhead could mark the difference between success and catastrophe. Yet, with remarkable discipline and unwavering focus, these sailors pressed forward, knowing that their actions would directly determine the fate of thousands of soldiers waiting to land on the fortified shores of Normandy. As they neared the beaches, the naval vessels began a complex ballet of suppression and delivery. Battleships opened fire, their massive guns roaring to life in a thunderous symphony that shook the surrounding waters and reverberated through the sand and cliffs. Each shell fired had to be carefully calculated, aimed to neutralize German bunkers, artillery positions, and machine gun nests without endangering the advancing troops. Destroyers, smaller but equally vital, maneuvered with agility, adjusting their positions in response to shifting tides and the unpredictable path of enemy fire. Landing craft, the lifeline of the infantry, moved in coordinated waves, each one packed with men, equipment, and vehicles, cutting through the choppy sea with tense precision. Sailors manned guns for hours on end, eyes straining against smoke, sun, and spray, muscles burning with exertion, all while knowing that a single miscalculation could send dozens of soldiers to their deaths. Their work was tireless, heroic, and absolutely indispensable. Each bullet fired, each shell dropped, each maneuver executed with skill and courage contributed to the survival and success of those who would soon set foot on the beaches. Above the water, Allied aircraft painted the skies with a display of courage and precision that mirrored the efforts below. Reconnaissance planes flew low and slow, braving enemy anti-aircraft fire to gather intelligence that would guide the landing forces. Pilots tracked German positions, noting fortifications, troop movements, and obstacles, often under conditions of thick fog, smoke, or enemy interception. Bombers followed, dropping their payloads on key defensive positions with the goal of weakening German resistance and creating openings for the troops on the ground. The timing of each sortie was critical. Bombers had to avoid hitting landing craft or friendly positions, while ensuring that enemy defenses were disrupted at the precise moment when soldiers would storm the beaches. Fighter planes swooped down to strafe machine gun nests and enemy positions that had survived the initial bombardments, drawing fire and attention away from the troops struggling through the surf below. The aerial campaign was not merely an auxiliary operation. It was integral to the success of the invasion, a delicate and deadly dance that required flawless coordination with the naval and ground forces. On the beaches themselves, the effect of this coordination became immediately apparent. As soldiers waded through chest-deep water, dragging weapons, ammunition, and wounded comrades, the suppressive fire from battleships and destroyers disrupted the German defenders' ability to organize and focus their fire. Each shell that struck a bunker, each strafing run that shredded barbed wire, each mortar that silenced an enemy position provided a lifeline to those struggling through the surf. Yet the dangers remained overwhelming. The combination of tides, mines, Submerged obstacles and relentless enemy fire created an environment where the margin for error was almost non-existent. Soldiers relied not only on the protection offered by naval and aerial fire but also on each other, moving in waves, covering one another, and improvising under conditions that would test the limits of human endurance. A single misstep could result in drowning, injury, or instant death from enemy bullets. Yet, despite these unimaginable hazards, the men pressed forward, driven by courage, determination, and an unshakable belief in the mission that had been entrusted to them. The human dimension of this coordination was staggering. Sailors adjusted their gunfire based on signals from troops on the beaches, carefully targeting threats while avoiding friendly fire. Pilots made split-second decisions to alter their flight paths and bombing trajectories in response to dynamic battlefield conditions. Ground commanders relayed information up and down the chain of command, adapting plans to account for casualties, unexpected resistance, and shifting tides. Communication lines crackled with urgency and tension, each order and report carrying the weight of life and death. In this intricate web of action, the bravery of individual soldiers remained at the center. Infantrymen waded through freezing water, bullets ripping past, to reach the shore. Medics ran into fire-swept sand to drag wounded men to relative safety. Officers and non-commissioned leaders moved along the front lines, directing men, bolstering morale, and making instant tactical decisions to exploit openings created by naval and aerial support. Each individual act, though part of a massive coordinated effort, carried a profound human significance, proof that courage and ingenuity could amplify the impact of even the most meticulously planned operation. The Germans, meanwhile, faced a nightmare scenario. They had fortified the beaches with bunkers, machine guns, and mines, confident that they could repel any invasion. Yet the combined assault of naval bombardment, aerial attack, and relentless infantry landings disrupted their carefully constructed defenses. Commanders attempted to rally troops, but the synchronized power of the Allied forces created confusion and panic. Units that had trained for months were now fractured under the simultaneous pressure of enemy fire from multiple domains. Machine guns could not be repositioned fast enough to respond to waves of soldiers landing from different directions. Mortars and artillery, often targeted and destroyed by naval and air bombardments, could not deliver effective support. The psychological impact of seeing Americans advance under such overwhelming fire, coupled with the deafening roar of ships and planes above, was immense. Many German soldiers experienced fear, disbelief, and desperation in equal measure, realizing that the Americans' audacity, coordination, and relentless momentum had placed them in an impossible situation. Despite the overwhelming scale of the operation, the courage of individual Americans shone brightly. A single soldier, momentarily separated from his unit, could take decisive action that altered the flow of battle, such as neutralizing a machine gun nest or rescuing wounded comrades. Sailors adjusted fire at a critical moment to allow a unit to cross a minefield. Pilots risked their lives to attack fortifications that were pinning down entire companies. Each act of bravery fed into the larger tapestry of the operation, transforming what might have been chaos into a symphony of calculated heroism. The coordination was so precise and effective that, despite the ferocity of German resistance, the Americans steadily advanced, securing beachheads, neutralizing key positions, and creating momentum that would carry them inland. The success of the operation was the direct result of both collective strategy and individual courage, a fusion of planning, skill, and the indomitable human spirit. By mid-morning, the impact of this tri-domain coordination became even more pronounced. Landing forces, once pinned, began to move in greater numbers and with more organization, spurred by the knowledge that naval gunfire and air support were continually suppressing enemy positions. Engineers began clearing obstacles, bridges were secured, and inland objectives were established. Soldiers who had faced near certain death on the beaches were now able to consolidate gains and push further, each advance enabled by the combined might of sea, air, and land forces. The Germans, overwhelmed and demoralized, struggled to mount a coherent defense. Units were scattered, communication lines severed, and key defensive positions had been destroyed or captured. The integration of forces on every level, from the captain of a landing craft to the pilot of a fighter plane, had created a force multiplier that magnified the effectiveness of the American soldier in ways that German planners had never anticipated. Even as the afternoon wore on, the bravery and skill required to maintain this coordination did not diminish. Sailors continued to maneuver in treacherous waters, firing with precision. Pilots maintained relentless sorties despite exhaustion. Infantrymen pressed forward through relentless fire, mud, and obstacles. Each wave of action depended on the others, and any lapse could have led to disaster. Yet, despite fatigue, fear, and staggering odds, the Americans continued to advance, exemplifying a level of determination and unity that had never before been witnessed in modern warfare. The victory on the beaches was not solely a product of overwhelming force. It was the result of courage, coordination, and the unbreakable resolve of individual men willing to risk everything for the mission, for their comrades, and for the ideals they represented.